My name is Rachel Duarte. I'm 36 years old, and I live in Grand Rapids, Michigan. 2 summers ago, on a little league field with the sun going orange behind the outfield fence, my 8-year-old Stepson hit the first home run of his life. He rounded third with his helmet sliding sideways over his eyes, and he ran right past his birth mother, right past her, close enough to touch her, and he threw both arms in the air and shouted one word at me. "Mom, did you see it? Did you see it?" He yelled it loud. He yelled it in front of 40 parents in folding chairs. He yelled it in front of his coach, in front of the snack shack, and in front of the one woman in that whole town who had been waiting patiently, quietly for months for exactly that. 19 days later, a man in a gray windbreaker stood on my porch and handed my husband a manila envelope. Inside was a court motion accusing me of trying to steal her child. Every waffle I ever made was in there, every bedtime story. Every quiet, ordinary, careful thing I had done for that little boy for 3 years, typed up, numbered, and turned into evidence against me. But here's the part that nobody standing on that grass knew. Not me. Not my husband. Not the umpire. Not the coach. Not one single parent in those folding chairs. That one word had been rehearsed for a week, just not by me. Let me take you back to the beginning. I should tell you who I am, because the court file got me wrong on the very first page. I'm a hospice nurse, 12 years. I have sat on the edge of a lot of beds at 3 a.m. and held a lot of hands that were letting go. I have told grown men that it was okay to cry in front of me. I have learned how to be calm in the worst room in the house. Family court was worse than any of it. I met Nathan when I was 32. His mother was one of my patients, a tough little woman named Peg who called me the good one and made me promise to make her son eat vegetables after she was gone. Nathan was a firefighter, 24 hours on, 48 off, with sawdust permanently under his fingernails from a wood shop he barely had time for, and he had a little boy named Owen with a cowlick that would not lie down and extremely strong opinions about trains. We got married in October, a year and a half before that baseball game, and before I moved a single box into that house, I sat down at my own kitchen table and wrote myself a set of rules in a spiral notebook, an actual notebook. I chart everything. It's what I do. Rule 1. I am Owen's stepmother. That is the only word I use for myself, out loud or in my own head. Rule 2. I do not go to anything his mother will be at, unless Owen himself asks me to come. Rule 3. I never say one unkind word about his mom, not in front of him, not behind him, not in my own car with the windows up. People asked me why I was so careful. I'd smile and say, nurses are like that. That wasn't the real answer. The real answer was that I had once been the kid standing in the middle of 2 grown-ups, and I still remembered exactly what the middle does to a 9-year-old stomach on a Sunday night. I'll get to that part, I promise. What matters right now is this. I followed every single rule I wrote, every day, for 3 years. It didn't save me. It turns out you can do everything right and still end up as exhibit in somebody else's war. Owen didn't warm up to me because I tried hard. He warmed up because I didn't. Kids have radar for effort, and that boy's radar was military grade, so I just existed near him. I read the paper, I stayed out of his room, I let him come to me. The first thing that ever worked was waffles. One Sunday I burned the first 2 and ended up cutting the third one into a rough shape that was supposed to be a boxcar. He looked at it for about 4 seconds and said, "That's a caboose?" I said, "It's whatever you want it to be, buddy." That became Sunday trains. Every other Sunday for 3 years, whether he was 6 or 8, whether he was in a good mood or a rotten one. That November, he had a loose tooth he wouldn't tell anybody about because a boy on the bus told him the tooth fairy skips kids who have 2 houses. He whispered it to me at the counter like he was confessing a crime. I told him the tooth fairy runs a route, same as the mail. She doesn't skip an address just because it's a duplex. He thought about that for a long moment and decided it was acceptable. The custody schedule gave Nathan alternating weeks plus Tuesdays and Thursdays. On those evenings, Owen and I did his reading log. 20 minutes, a beanbag chair by the radiator, a chapter book about a boy who lives in a train station. He called me Rachel, just Rachel. That was the deal, and honestly, it was more than enough. His mother, Kristen, had him the rest of the time. 15 minutes away, same school district, and for 3 years we kept the peace the way you carry a full cup down a hallway, slowly, both hands. Once, in that beanbag chair, he got sleepy and mumbled, "Mo," and then caught it, and it came out, "Rachel," and he laughed at himself, and I laughed too, and I did not think about it again for 6 months. I should have, not because he did anything wrong, because somebody else was listening to how that boy loved me, and she was taking a very different kind of note. I want to say something about Kristen Marsh, and I want it on the record, since so much else about me ended up on the record. She was not a monster. She was a realtor with a spotless white sub and a laminated family calendar on the side of her refrigerator. She loved Owen fiercely, in a checklist kind of way, matching socks, dentist twice a year, thank you notes written the same week. She never missed a game. She never missed anything. Owen's 8th birthday party was in February at one of those indoor trampoline places, planned down to the quarter hour. I went because Owen asked me at drop-off, bouncing on his toes with his backpack still on, and Rule 2 says Owen's ass wins. I stayed by the wall. I gave him our gift, a train encyclopedia the size of a car battery, and he hugged me around the middle and held on maybe 2 seconds longer than the room was comfortable with. Across the party, Kristen's mother, Diane, watched us over the top of her coffee cup and said, to nobody and to everybody, "Well, isn't that a devoted babysitter?" Later, in the little party kitchen, Kristen was boxing up cake. She smiled at me. It was a perfectly pleasant smile, and it made the hair stand up on my arms. "There's only one Mom, Rachel," she said. "He doesn't get two." And then she handed me a slice of cake, like we'd been talking about the weather. I drove home and told Nathan we needed thicker walls. From that night on, I said, every schedule change goes through the co-parenting app. Nothing verbal, nothing casual, nothing that could be repeated wrong later. Nathan said I was overreacting. Then in April, something changed. Kristen got warm. She waved at drop-off. She sent Nathan a message saying Owen talks about Rachel constantly. Isn't that sweet? She asked me in a parking lot how my mother-in-law's old house sale was going, like we were friends. Something in me went very quiet and very alert, and I could not have told you why. Warm is better than cold, isn't it? It took me almost a year to understand what that warmth was. It was somebody putting corn out in a field. The game was the second Saturday in June. Bishop Park, Field 3, bleachers half full, a snack shack selling blue freeze pops, that particular smell of cut grass and dust and hot metal. I sat with Nathan behind the fence because that was my spot and I liked it. Kristen sat about 40 feet down the first baseline with her friend Bethany. I noticed something without knowing I noticed it. Bethany had her phone up almost the entire game, not scrolling, up. Pointed at us more or less the way you hold a phone when you're waiting for something to happen and you don't know exactly when. Bottom of the fifth, my cautious, train-loving, choke-up on the bat Owen swung at a pitch he had no business swinging at and put it over the left field fence by about 4 feet. The bleachers came apart. Coaches were screaming. That boy rounded second with his helmet halfway over his eyes, and he was already looking for us, scanning the fence, wild with it, and he ran past the third base coach, and he ran past his mother, and he came straight at me with both arms up. "Mom, did you see it? Did you see it?" I have never heard a baseball field go that quiet that fast. It was like a glass hitting a tile floor. I watched Kristen's face change in real time, and half a beat behind it, I watched Bethany's phone swing over toward us. Kristen came across that grass fast. "Is that what you're teaching him to call you?" Her voice carried to both dugouts. 40 parents suddenly found something interesting in their laps. Owen's whole face folded. He said, But you said," and Kristen already had him by the wrist and was steering him toward the parking lot, cleats dragging in the dirt, his helmet still on. I stood there holding his water bottle. His name was on the side in my handwriting. Nathan said her name once, uselessly. For weeks after that, one question kept me up at night, and it wasn't the one everyone assumed. It was this, "But you said," what had my 8-year-old been about to say? It was our night. Kristen brought him back at 7 o'clock sharp and did not say one word at the door. Owen pushed his dinner around. At bedtime, he asked me the question that hurt worse than anything any adult said all year. Did I do a bad thing? I sat on the edge of his bed and used my work voice, the one I use right before something is going to sting. "No, buddy, word slip. Kids call their teachers Mom all the time. Nobody is mad at you." He nodded at his train lamp, not believing me even a little, and then asked if the tooth fairy thing was still true, the mail route thing. "Still true," I said. He slept. I didn't. At 11 o'clock, Nathan's phone lit up on the nightstand, a message through the co-parenting app. He read it twice and then handed me the phone with a look I'd never seen on him. I am documenting this incident. This reflects an ongoing pattern of boundary erosion and parental interference, which I have tolerated for far too long. There were 4 more sentences like that, stacked up like cinder blocks. Pattern, erosion, interference. Nathan stared at the wall. "She doesn't write like that," he said. "Rachel. She writes in exclamation points. She sent me a birthday reminder last year with 3 cake emojis. This reads like a legal filing." He was right, and the wrongness of it sat down in my chest and did not get up. Somebody had helped her write that message, somebody who bills by the hour. And if a lawyer's voice was already coming out of that woman's phone 2 hours after a Little League game, then that lawyer had not been hired that afternoon. 19 days later, the envelope came. Motion to modify parenting time, with request for restraining provisions regarding the stepmother's parental interference. That's the caption. That's the title of my own life, typed by a stranger. I read all 31 pages at my kitchen table with a yellow highlighter, because charting is how I stay upright. Page 4, the Waffles, a calculated campaign to purchase the child's affection through food rituals. Page 5, the reading log. On some Tuesdays I had signed the school's form on the line that said parent signature, because that was the only line the form had, holding herself out as the child's parent in official school records. Page 6, the fall conference I attended, sitting next to Nathan, where I said maybe 9 words, and all of them were about trains. Inserting herself into educational decision-making. My marriage was in there as a strategy. My job was in there, turned inside out, a healthcare professional uniquely trained in emotional influence over vulnerable people. I actually laughed out loud at that one. Then I stopped laughing because the next paragraph referred to a family drawing produced by the child demonstrating troubling evidence of intentional parental displacement. A drawing? I had never seen any drawing. And stapled behind, all of it was a sworn statement from Kristen with one sentence in it, that I recognized the way you recognize a face. There is only one mother in this child's life. The last page asked the court to bar me from acting as a parent at his school and at his doctor's office. I put down the highlighter. In my hallway there is a photo of Owen and me holding a cardboard locomotive we built for the second grade science fair, both of us covered in silver spray paint. I remember looking at it and thinking, with a strange, flat calm, they'll find a way to use that too. Ellen Bricker had been doing family law in Kent County for 31 years, and her office smelled like burnt coffee and other people's worst days. She read the whole motion in about 10 minutes, then took off her glasses. First, she said, this does not change custody. No judge in this state takes time away from a father because a child yelled "Mom" at a ball game. Second, and I need you to actually hear this one, alienation claims are fog. You can't punch fog. From today forward, every kind thing you do can be photographed, timed, stamped, and stapled into their story. She told us the court would appoint a guardian ad litem, a neutral investigator for Owen. She told us this would take months, not weeks. Months. The retainer was $8,000. That was our roof fund, gone in one signature. Then she flipped back to the original divorce judgment and tapped a paragraph I had read 100 times and never once understood. Right of first refusal, she said. If Nathan can't personally care for Owen for more than 4 hours, Kristen gets the first option, before a babysitter, before a grandparent, before you. I asked how often people actually use that. Ellen looked at me over the top of her glasses for a long second. Mrs. Dort, she said, you strike me as a careful woman. Get ready to be careful in a much smaller room. She used it that same Friday. But before I tell you about the smaller room, let me say this, because I think some of you already know this feeling in your bones. If you have ever had the nicest thing you do turned into the worst thing you've done, then you know exactly where I was standing that week. Stay with me, because what that little boy did months later, in a room I was not allowed to enter, is the entire reason I can tell you this story at all. The next Tuesday I drove to Fairview Elementary at 3:15, the way I had every Tuesday for 2 school years. I gave my name at the office window, and Mrs. Pratt, who had asked me for my waffle recipe in October, would not look up at me. I'm so sorry, Rachel, she said. Your name's been removed from the pickup list pending clarification of the custody order. There's a letter on file. A letter from a law office, dated 6 days before. The school wasn't taking sides, she explained, reading it off the page. When there's a dispute, they can only release a child to people named in the court order. I understood completely. I hated that I understood. Through the glass behind her, I could see the pickup bench, and I could see Owen on the end of it with his backpack in his lap and the little train keychain hanging off the zipper, feet swinging, watching the line of cars for mine. Nobody had told him either. I called Nathan, who left a shift change and drove over. I waited in my car around the corner, where Owen couldn't see me because an 8-year-old should not have to watch his Rachel get turned away at a window. 3 days later, the school mailed home updated paperwork, and in that stack was his emergency contact card. 4 lines. Father, mother, and then my name on line 3 with a red pen line drawn straight through it. Neat. Official. Somebody had pressed hard enough to dent the card. I put it in the junk drawer under the takeout menu so Nathan wouldn't have to see it, and then, I'm being honest with you, I took it back out and looked at it for a long, long time. That red line was the first thing her lawyer ever gave me. It was not the last. Then came the clause. Nathan works 24-hour shifts. My schedule runs long days, and Kristen had both calendars, because co-parenting apps share calendars. That's the whole point of them. Any window where Nathan would be gone more than 4 hours, she claimed. Every shift. The Saturday of a training. The Thursday he had a department physical. All of it legal. All of it correct. All of it aimed. Owen started living out of a booster seat, backpack at one house, glove at the other, library book lost somewhere in between. He fell asleep in the car so often that Kristen bought him a neck pillow, and I saw it on the seat at a handoff, and something in me cracked a little at how normal it looked. I'm a nurse. I know what stress looks like in a child, and it does not announce itself. It chews its fingernails down past the quick. It wets the bed again after 2 dry years. It asks strange, careful little questions at dinner, like it's checking the ice before it steps out. Nathan asked his captain for a shift swap. His captain was sympathetic and completely powerless. You don't rearrange a fire schedule for a custody clause. We moved everything we could move. It wasn't enough hours to matter. And then one Thursday in the beanbag chair, Owen said the thing that told me this was much worse than logistics. He wasn't reading. He was holding the book open and looking at it, which is a different thing. Mom asks me every night what you and me did, he said, and I don't know which answer is the right one. I told him every answer that's true is the right one. He nodded, slowly, like I'd handed him homework. My stomach has not completely unclenched since I told you I'd get to my part. Here it is, and I'll keep it short. When I was 9, my father married a woman named Eleanor. Eleanor had garden dirt permanently under 2 fingernails and a laugh he could hear through a closed door, and she taught me how to clean and bandage a scraped knee without making a production out of it, which, if you're keeping score, is more or less the entire job description of a hospice nurse. I loved her fast, the way lonely kids do. My mother found out that I had hugged Eleanor at a Christmas concert. On the drive home, she kept both hands on the wheel and said, without raising her voice at all, "If you ever do that in front of me again, I will consider you lost to me." 9 years old, buckled into the back seat, learning the exchange rate on love. So I adapted. I loved Eleanor in secret, in the daylight hours my mother couldn't audit, and I became useful, because useful people don't get sent away. I set the table before anyone asked. I got grades nobody had to check on. I grew into a nurse who charts everything twice, and a stepmother who writes herself a rulebook in a spiral notebook. Do you see the pattern? I spent my whole life believing that belonging was a subscription, something you keep paid up with flawless behavior. Eleanor died the spring I turned 28. At the luncheon afterward, my mother told a table of people that it was a blessing Eleanor never had children of her own. I decided in that room that if I ever got an Owen, he would never, not for one single afternoon, stand in the middle the way I had. I wrote that rule book so that boy would never live my childhood. Kristen was about to hand it to him anyway, laminated with exhibit stickers on it. The guardian ad litem was appointed in August. Her name was Marjorie Klein, 50-something, sensible shoes, a canvas bag full of legal pads, and the eyes of a woman who has been lied to by professionals. Her job was to see both homes and tell the court what was best for Owen, and I decided I was going to make that visit perfect. You already know where this is going. I cleaned that house to hospital standards. I put together a binder, school, allergies, his inhaler, dentist, the reading log, the science fair schedule, and I printed a second copy in case she wanted one for her file. She walked through the house for an hour, asked what Owen's favorite dinner was, asked what I did when he misbehaved, took notes in handwriting I could not read upside down, which I only know because I tried. At the door she paused and said, "You keep a very organized home, Mrs. Duarte," in a tone I chose to hear as a compliment. 2 weeks later, Ellen got a read on her preliminary impressions and gave it to me straight because I asked for things straight. "She finds the home stable and the child clearly bonded," Ellen said. "She also described you as composed, prepared, and possibly rehearsed." Rehearsed? 12 years of charting twice, of being the calm one in the worst room in the house, of earning my place through competence. And the first neutral observer of my entire life wrote it down as a warning sign. The one thing that had always kept me safe was now testifying against me. But something else happened during that visit, and I didn't understand its value for another month. Marjorie asked Owen about exactly one thing at length, the drawing, and Owen told her, matter of fact, that he made it at school, in March. 3 months before the ball game, before any of it. I found out what the drawing was from his teacher, Mrs. Underhill, in a hallway, and she told me only what any parent standing in that hallway could have seen for themselves. She was careful as a bomb technician about everything else, and I don't blame her. In March, her class did a unit called My Family. The kids drew their people, labeled them, and the drawings went up on the wall for spring open house. 23 crayon families under a paper rainbow. Owen drew 3 stick figures, a woman with long brown hair labeled Mom, a tall man labeled Dad, and a third figure with a ponytail holding what was unmistakably a spatula labeled Rachel. There was a lopsided sun in the upper left corner. He puts that same sun in the corner of everything he's ever drawn. That was it. That was the whole crime. An 8-year-old drew the people who love him and included the one who makes the waffles. Mrs. Underhill remembered open house night because Kristen had stood in front of that wall for a long time, long enough for a teacher juggling 40 conversations to notice. Then she took a picture of it and said nothing to anybody. 3 weeks after that, she got Friendly a drop-off. And 7 weeks after that, Bethany's phone came up at a baseball game and stayed up. I walked out to my car, doing the arithmetic over and over, the way your tongue keeps going back to a chipped tooth. She saw the drawing in March. The warmth started in April. The camera came out in June. I couldn't prove one word of it yet, but I finally understood the order of events. And the order of events was the entire story. A month later, that crayon drawing had a new name. Exhibit C. The formal response packet came in October, and I made the mistake of opening it alone. Behind the caption, behind the numbered paragraphs, behind the certificate of service, there was a photocopy. My family, in his careful, backward-leaning handwriting. Mom, Dad, Rachel, with the spatula, the lopsided sun turned gray, because photocopiers don't believe in suns. And in the bottom right corner, a white sticker was black. Exhibit C. I sat with that page for a long time. I have held a lot of heavy things in my hands in 12 years. Other people's last letters. A daughter's shoulders while a doctor said the worst sentence there is. I am telling you that a photocopied crayon, drawing with an exhibit sticker on it, is heavy. They stapled an 8-year-old's love behind a court caption. I said that out loud to an empty kitchen. Then I put the page in my binder because charting is how I stay upright. Nathan looked at it once and had to leave the room. That weekend, Owen was doing his reading log across the counter from me, and without looking up he asked, "Why did Mom take a picture of my drawing? Did I spell something wrong?" "You spelled everything right, buddy," I said. "Every single thing." He went back to his book. I went back to breathing. Hold that drawing in your mind for a minute, the way I held it in that kitchen, because that piece of paper was not finished with any of us, and when it came back in a way nobody in that courthouse saw coming. The interim hearing was in November, in a beige room, in front of a referee named Hollis who had the voice of a man grading his 9,000th essay. Her attorney played the video. There it was on a courtroom screen. The dust, the swing, my boy rounding third with his helmet sideways, running at me with both arms up. "Mom, did you see it?" Freeze frame. The clip stopped one breath after the word, "cut clean," before Owen said, "But you said," before her hand closed around his wrist before the parking lot. Edited grief is very tidy. Her attorney called it a window into a confused child's daily reality. Ellen objected to about half of it and won a third. Referee Hollis rubbed his eyes and did what courts do when they can't possibly know yet. He issued an interim order. Pending investigation, Mrs. Dort shall not hold herself out as a parent to the child's school or medical providers. It wasn't a finding. Ellen said that 4 separate times on the courthouse steps, "It doesn't say you did anything. It says the fog needs time to clear." But orders don't read the way they're meant. They read the way they land. I sign medication sheets for a living. My signature keeps people from getting the wrong dose on the worst night of their lives. And a court had just ordered me not to sign an 8-year-old's reading log. I went home and did something I'm not proud of. I watched that clip 11 more times on our copy of the exhibit, with the volume all the way up. And somewhere around the 11th time, I stopped asking what the video showed, and I started asking 3 different questions. How long was the original recording? Why does it start before the at-bat? And who tells a friend to stand at a little league game and film the parents instead of the game? 2 weeks into the new schedule, Owen stopped calling me anything at all. I noticed it the way you notice a missing tooth with your tongue before your brain catches up. He stood in the kitchen doorway one evening, twisting the bottom of his shirt in both hands, and said, "Hey, can I have some water?" Hey, that was my new name. Not Rachel. Not anything, because somewhere between 2 houses, a little boy had worked out that every name in his mouth was a landmine, and the safest thing to say is nothing. I got him the water. I kept my voice completely level while something inside my chest sat down on the floor. Nathan and Kristen had already agreed, in one of maybe 3 civil exchanges that whole autumn, to get Owen a therapist, a gentle woman named Dr. Boone with a sand tray and a fish tank. For the record, that agreement is the one thing this entire apparatus got right on the first try. After a session in early December, Dr. Boone told them both exactly what I could have told anyone from a beanbag chair. "He is learning that names have consequences," she said. "He's protecting the adults by erasing himself." He was 8. That night I got out the spiral notebook and wrote a 4th rule at the bottom of the page. Rule 4. Need nothing. Not a name, not a title, not a thank you. Then I sat and looked at it, and I tore the page out, because even I could hear it. That was the old reflex talking. That was a 9-year-old setting the table so she wouldn't be sent away. Here's what I knew for certain by Christmas. A boy too frightened to say your name will still climb into your lap after a nightmare. He did. Twice. No court order reaches that far. Nothing does. In January, my steady husband hit his limit. He came home from a prep call with Ellen, dropped his keys in the bowl hard enough to chip it, and said, I'm done playing defense. I want to go after her. A private investigator, her finances, her boyfriends, a psychological evaluation, all of it. She is burning our family down, and I keep handing her the matches. And I said no, not a gentle no, a flat one. I will not do to that boy's mother what she is doing to me. And Nathan, who had watched me get erased off a pickup list without ever raising my voice, finally raised his. You don't get to be the only person in this house with principles, Rachel. Your principles are losing. That was our first real fight, the kind with a closed door and a spare blanket on the couch. He wasn't wrong about the losing. I wasn't wrong about the matches. Around midnight, he came and sat on the edge of the bed and told me something in a voice I had never heard him use. The week Kristen's divorce was finalized, her mother took her out to lunch, in public, at the restaurant every woman from their church goes to, and Diane told her, over a salad, that divorce is what a woman gets when she has failed at the only job that counts. Her own mother, in front of the lunch crowd. That church, that circle, that scorekeeping, that's the water that woman swam in her entire life. I'm not excusing her, Nathan said. I just know where the wound is. I lay awake a long time after that, because I knew that verdict. My mother handed down the exact same one from the front seat of a car when I was 9 years old. 2 women, 1 fear, 2 completely different ways of gripping the wheel. That thought did not soften me, it clarified me. The last Thursday in February, Owen spiked a fever. Nothing frightening. 101 and change, some virus doing laps through the 3rd grade. It was our night, and Kristen, to her credit, didn't fight the handoff. He couldn't get to sleep, so I sat up against his headboard and he leaned on my shoulder, hot and heavy, drifting in that in-between place feverish kids go. And out of that place, into the dark, he said it. I did it wrong. Did what wrong, buddy? The mom thing. He rubbed his face on my sleeve. Mom practiced it with me in the car. She said if I called you Mom at my game after, I'd get a surprise. But then she got mad anyway, so I did it wrong, right? The train lamp hummed on the dresser. My whole body went very still. The way it goes still at work when a monitor changes its mind. There it was, the missing half of But You Said, the friendly April, the phone already up. A little boy running lines in a booster seat, thinking it was a game, thinking there was a prize at the end. And the prize was watching every adult he loves detonate. I want to be honest with you about the next 60 seconds, because they were 60 full seconds. I am married to a man with a lawyer on retainer. My phone was in my back pocket. 1 voice memo, 30 seconds of audio, and this entire nightmare flips over. I did not take out my phone. I did not ask him a single follow-up question. I was not going to turn my Stepson's sickbed into a crime scene. And if you want to know the exact difference between me and the woman who was suing me, it lived right there in that pocket. I pulled the blanket up over his shoulder and said, You did nothing wrong. Not one single thing. He was asleep before I finished the sentence. Then I sat in the dark, doing the terrible arithmetic. My stepson had just handed me the truth that could end this entire case. And I could never, ever use it? If he's ever held proof you refuse to use, tell me about it in the comments. I read them all. I told Ellen the next morning in her office. No recording, no notes, just my mouth. I told her what he said and what I hadn't done. She looked at me the way triage nurses look at people who walk in carrying their own severed finger in a Tupperware. Calm, impressed, slightly alarmed. A feverish 8-year-old's bedtime sentence is not evidence, she said. And you recording it or coaching him to repeat it is the exact thing they've accused you of. So we agree. Nobody touches the boy. Then she leaned back and pushed her glasses up onto her head. But there are clean doors, she said. Door 1. They filed that video. They made it an exhibit that opens the door to discovery about the video itself, how it was made, who made it, and what was said around the making of it. I can subpoena the messages between your husband's ex-wife and the woman holding the camera. That isn't spying. That's procedure. They invited it the second they hit file. Door 2. Marjorie Klein still has to interview Owen alone. No parents, no lawyers, no scripts. That is a standard part of every guardian ad litem investigation in this state. We don't request it. We don't shape it. It simply happens. And whatever that child says in that room, he says on his own 2 feet. I sat with that, and then I gave her my one condition, and I made her write it down, which amused her not at all. Nobody prepares Owen. Nobody rehearses him. Nobody so much as tells him the interview matters. You understand you're tying my hands, Ellen said. Tie your hands, I said. Tie mine. Nobody ties his. Ever again. She sent the subpoena that week. Discovery crawls, she warned me. Give it a month. The truth took 11 days. The production came back on a Tuesday, a PDF of text threads with a cover letter, and Ellen called me before my shift ended. Come in, she said. Bring Nathan. Don't speed. The messages between Kristen and Bethany started 9 days before the game. Kristen, be at the Saturday 10,000 game. I need you filming. Bethany, filming what? His team is 2-9 lol. Kristen, just keep the phone on the bleachers, on us, the whole game. You'll know it when you hear it. Bethany, okay. Weird, but okay. And then the one Ellen had marked with an actual paper clip like it was 1994. Kristen, don't worry about it. I've been working on it with him all week. He'll say it. 6 days after the game. Kristen, did you get it? Send me the clip tonight before you send anything to anybody else. I read that thread twice. Nathan read it once and walked to the window and stood there with both hands on top of his head, like a man watching his house burn from the front lawn, which, to be fair, is exactly what he was. Ellen was, professionally speaking, delighted. This is manufactured evidence, she said. She built the incident, she staged the camera, she scripted her own outrage, and then she filed the finished product with a court. Put this next to whatever the guardian hears from that boy, and this case doesn't collapse. It reverses. I should have felt the win. I want to tell you, I felt the win. What I felt was one sentence running on a loop. I've been working on it with him all week. Working on it. In a booster seat, an 8-year-old running lines with his mother, believing there was a surprise waiting at the end of it. I looked at those pages fanned out on Ellen's conference table, the biggest weapon anyone had ever put in my hand. And my first complete thought was, so this is what it cost him. Before any of it could reverse, March came, and with it the spring open house. Owen had spent 2 weeks building a model railroad bridge out of craft sticks and hot glue, and he had invited me back in January before any of us knew what March would look like. You have to see it, he said, with capital letters in his voice. Rule 2 says, Owens ask wins. The interim order said I could not act like a parent. So I went as exactly what I legally was, a guest of my husband, hands in my pockets, a name tag that said visitor. Kristen came too, because that was her right. I want to be precise about that. It was her right. What happened next wasn't anybody's right. Owen came around the corner from the gym, saw Nathan and me by the water fountain, lit up like a switch, then saw his mother standing by his classroom door. And he stopped. Full stop. Sneakers squeaking on wax. His eyes went left, right, left. And then my boy, who runs at everything, turned around and bolted down the hallway and locked himself in the boys' bathroom. It took the school counselor, and Miss Colloway, 40 minutes of talking through a door decorated with paper shamrocks. A whole hallway of families pretended very hard not to listen. I stood exactly where I had stopped walking, because moving in any direction felt like taking a side. Halfway through, he said one sentence loud enough for all of us to hear it through the door. I don't want anybody to come to anything ever again. Kristen left before he came out, not in victory. I watched her walk to her car through the window, and she walked like a woman carrying something that had shifted and gotten heavier. Nathan drove us home. Owen sat in the back with the bridge on his knees. Nobody had seen the bridge. In the garage, in the dark, I finally said out loud the sentence that had been assembling itself in me for months. Every way I win, he loses. My phone buzzed in the cup holder, Marjorie Klein's office. Owen's interview was Monday. I was not in that room. That's the entire point of that room. Marjorie interviewed Owen alone at her office, after school, with a sand tray and a basket of fidgets. Everything I know comes from the report she later filed, which Ellen read to me in a conference room with the door shut. They talked about third grade. They talked about trains at length. Her notes record the difference between a diesel and a steam locomotive with a completely straight face, and I will love that woman until the day I die for taking it down. And then, with no question pending, nobody asked him anything. Owen said this. Mom told me to call Rachel Mom at my game. We practiced it in the car. And then everybody got mad at Rachel. He picked up a fidget, put it down, and finished. Rachel never asked me to call her that, not even one time. She says I already have a mom. Marjorie, neutral as Switzerland, asked him what he wished would happen now. His answer is in the file, word for word, and it belongs in a textbook. I want to stop being the mailman. She asked him what he meant by that. Everybody keeps giving me the words to carry, he said, and then I'm the one who gets in trouble when they get delivered. 8 years old. Ellen finished reading and set the report down like it was hot. "With this and those texts," she said, "it's over. Their case doesn't have a leg to stand on. It doesn't have a floor." We were winning. After 9 months of red lines in shrinking rooms, every card in the deck had landed face up in my hand, and the little boy at the center of it had defended me better than any attorney in Michigan to the one stranger whose entire job was to listen. So I need you to understand what I say next, because it confused everybody who loves me. I sat in that conference room holding complete victory, and all I could feel was the floor going out from under a bathroom door with paper shamrocks on it. 3 days later, I saw the machine that built Kristen Marsh, and I saw it through a windshield. I stopped at a pharmacy after a 12-hour shift, still in scrubs, around 10 at night. I recognized her car 2 spots over before I recognized her, because that car is always spotless. She was sitting in the driver's seat, not moving, phone face up on the dash, on speaker, window cracked 2 inches, the lot was empty and quiet, the way lots are at 10 o'clock. And I heard Diane's voice come out of that phone, clipped, certain, the voice of a woman who has never once been contradicted at her own dinner table. "If that woman ends up raising him, then you were never really his mother. Do you hear me? You fix this, or don't come to Easter expecting everybody to act normal." Call ended. Kristen didn't cry. That's the part I keep coming back to. She just sat there with both hands on the wheel of a parked car, staring at the automatic doors like they were a test she was failing. And she looked exactly like a 9-year-old buckled into a back seat learning the exchange rate on love. I stood in the dark holding a little white paper bag, and she never saw me. I'm not going to pretend that fixed anything. Understanding her did not excuse her. She built the trap. She rehearsed a baby in a booster seat and sprang it on all of us. And in a few weeks, a court officer was going to read her own text messages back to her in a public room. All of that was still true. But I drove home knowing one more true thing, and it changed the shape of everything I did after. Destroying Kristen would not shut the machine off. It would only prove the machine right and hand it a brand new child to run. Ellen's plan was clean and total, and she laid it out at my kitchen table, like a general, with good news. We file the texts, and the guardians report manufactured evidence. Litigation abuse, we ask for our fees, we ask that her parenting time be supervised while she completes a psychological evaluation. You walk out of there officially blameless, Rachel, on paper, forever. There are still days I can taste that offer. And then I looked at the binder on the counter, and the gray photocopy sticking out of the top of it, and the sun that came out gray. And I asked Ellen one question. Is the file public? She said what lawyers say. Court records generally are. Some things can be sealed. No guarantee. Then walk it forward with me, I said. Owen turns 17. He gets curious, and kids do get curious. He pulls the file, and he reads a court finding that says his mother lost him because of things he said in a room with a sand tray. He finds out his own sentences were the ammunition. He was the mailman one last time, and the letter he carried took his mother down. I looked at Nathan. Every way I win that way, he loses. I watched my husband, who had been ready for scorched earth since January, look at that gray photocopy for a long moment. Then he nodded once, the way something expensive breaks quietly. "So here's what we're going to do instead," I said. "The evidence stays in the holster. We use it exactly once, in private, as leverage, and we trade it for the entire war. Her schedule doesn't change. Not 1 hour. Family therapy for all of us, court-ordered, so nobody gets to quietly drift out of it. Every allegation withdrawn. And the texts, the report, Owen's words, sealed forever, somewhere he can never find them." Ellen rubbed her temples and said, 31 years. No client has ever asked me not to win. I said, "I'm asking you to win something else." The courthouse on a Tuesday morning smells like floor wax and instant coffee and other people's nerves. I emptied my pockets for the metal detector and watched my wedding ring roll around in a gray plastic bowl, and I thought about how many families have watched their whole lives roll around in that same bowl. We got there early. Her side got there earlier. Kristen sat on the far bench in a blazer with the tags freshly snipped, hands folded in her lap, and 1 row behind her, spine like a carpenter's level, sat Diane in the good pearls, presiding. Bethany was not there. Bethany, Ellen told me, had gone extremely quiet since a subpoena with her name on it entered the world. Her attorney looked relaxed. That's the detail I've never forgotten. He was relaxed because as far as their table knew, this was still June's case, the video, the drawing, the pattern, the fog. The subpoenaed messages had gone to lawyers, not to clients, and certainly not to mothers. In law, Kristen had clearly not volunteered the contents to anybody she was afraid of. They had no idea what was sitting in a sealed folder in Ellen's bag, riding to court like a passenger. Referee Hollis took the bench. Preliminary matters. Scheduling. The theater of chairs. And then her attorney called me as a witness, which Ellen had predicted with her eyes closed. "They want you rattled," she'd said. "You will not be rattled." I took the stand in the gray cardigan Nathan calls my deposition sweater. I have been calm through codes. I have been calm while a grown man screamed at me in a hallway because screaming at me was the only thing left he could do for his mother. I folded my hands on the rail. For once, the chart in front of me was my own life. He buttoned his jacket and smiled the way men smile before an easy layup. "Mrs. Dort, do you love Owen?" "Yes." Short. "True, true. You'd agree you've built a very strong bond with him." "I would." "And you'd like, wouldn't you, to be his mother?" And I looked at Owen's mother while I answered her lawyer. "He has a mother," I said. "I'm his Rachel." Somewhere behind my ribs, in the place where I keep things for later, I felt that sentence file itself away. He moved to the documents, the reading log. "You signed on the parent line, correct?" On the line the form provided. "Yes, there was no other line." "Did that concern you?" "It concerned me enough that last fall I asked the office whether the form could add a caregiver line. They reprinted it. The reprinted form is in evidence. It's the one with my name on the caregiver line, from October forward." He looked down at his notes for half a second longer than he meant to. Ellen didn't move a muscle, but I know satisfaction when I'm sitting next to it. He tried the conference. He tried the waffles. My answers were short and boring, which was the entire strategy. Mine and my trainings. Boring is what true sounds like under oath. So he reached for the centerpiece. "Let's talk about the video." And the whole room tilted toward the screen. Referee Hollis, who had watched that clip in November, looked up with the first visible interest of his morning. I watched that man reach to cue up an exhibit that his own client had manufactured, with the paper trail sitting in the sealed folder 10 feet from his elbow. He had built his entire case on a stage his client had set, and he did not know it. She did. Kristen was looking at the tape. Ellen stood. "Your Honor, before counsel plays the video, we'd request a brief recess." And then the part nobody in that room expected, least of all Kristen. I asked to speak with her alone. The hallway outside courtroom 4 has a wooden bench bolted to the wall. That's where the war actually ended, both attorneys standing 20 feet off pretending to check their phones, close enough to supervise a settlement conversation, far enough not to hear one. Kristen sat down because her legs decided for her. I stayed standing, and I put the folder on the bench between us. "Read it." I watched her find her own words. "Be at the Saturday game. Keep the phone on us. I've been working on it with him all week. He'll say it." I watched her read the first page of Marjorie's report, where her son, with nobody asking, in a room with a sand tray, told a court officer what his mother had practiced with him in the car. Her hands were shaking by the second page. Mine were completely steady, and I want to be honest about why. It wasn't strength. I had already made my decision, and stillness is what a made decision feels like. "Here's what happens if I walk back through that door and hand this to the referee," I said, in the voice I use for medication instructions. "Findings. Fees. Supervised visits while you sit through an evaluation. Your mother's church gets a story with your name in it that never, ever goes away. And in 9 years, a 17-year-old pulls a public file and learns that his sentences were the bullet." She looked up at me, and she wasn't a litigant anymore. She was a woman watching every door in the hallway close at once. "Why are you showing me this out here?" she said. "Why not in there?" So I told her the truth I had carried across that hallway to deliver. "Because you were right about one thing," I said. "He doesn't need 2 moms. He needs 2 grown-ups." And then I gave her the offer. One time only. "You withdraw every allegation today, on the record. We sign a stipulation. The schedule stays exactly as it is. You don't lose a single hour. All 3 of us go into family therapy, court-ordered, so nobody gets to quit when it gets uncomfortable, and this folder gets sealed forever. No findings, no file for him to ever find. It will always say you withdrew," I said, "and it will never say I was innocent. I give up the verdict. You give up the war." She stared at me, and her voice came apart in the middle. "Why would you give that up?" And 9-year-old me answered her from the back seat of my mother's car. "Because somebody once made me choose sides," I said. "And I know exactly who that little girl grows up to be. She's standing in front of you." Kristen signed. Her attorney read the stipulation in that hallway with the expression of a man watching a winning lottery ticket dissolve in the rain. To his credit, or his billing forecast credit, he made no speeches. Back inside, both lawyers approached the bench together, which in that building is what a white flag looks like. Referee Hollis read the joint stipulation slowly, then looked up over his glasses at both tables. "Counsel," he said, "an agreement like this, in this courtroom, is about as common as a warm February." Then he read it into the record. Parenting schedule unchanged. All pending motions withdrawn with prejudice, which is the legal way of saying you can never bring them again. Family systems therapy for all 3 adults and the minor child, with quarterly compliance review, court ordered. Exactly as I'd asked, so nobody could drift. The restriction on me dissolved. And the designated discovery materials and the guardian ad litem's interview excerpts sealed by agreement of the parties. So ordered. He didn't even lift the gavel, but I felt it land somewhere in my chest anyway. And then came the part I never negotiated for. The part nobody saw coming, least of all me. Kristen stood up. Her attorney reached for her sleeve and missed. "Your Honor," she said, and the room got that particular quiet that only unscripted moments get in a courtroom. "For the record, I withdraw every allegation against Mrs. Dorte, all of them." Her voice cracked open on the next sentence, and she said it anyway in a room that contained her own mother. "She never tried to take my son, not once." Hollis watched her for a moment. Then he nodded. "Noted," he said. One word. Into the transcript, which is the only place I ever needed it. Diane stood up and left the gallery before the session closed. Pearls and posture and silence, and the big oak door swung shut behind her with everybody watching and nobody following. What she left behind stayed sealed. Somewhere in a vault in Kent County today, there is an envelope, and inside that envelope a little boy says, "Rachel never asked me to call her that, not even one time. To no one, forever." That silence is the most expensive thing I own. We drove home on a Tuesday afternoon, and nobody had won. That was the victory. Therapy was not a montage. First session, Kristen sat as far from me as the room physically allowed and answered in single sentences. Owen built a wall out of sand tray fences straight down the middle of everything, which Dr. Boone said was not subtle and also not bad. Walls are how children ask whether the fighting is actually over. Fourth session, he drew again. Small stuff. Trains, obviously. And Dr. Boone gave him the sentence all 3 of us should have given him back in June. She said it with all of us listening. "You're allowed to love everybody in this room. The grown-up feelings in this family are grown-up jobs. You are fired from every one of them." Owen thought being fired was hilarious, and something in that room came loose by about a degree. That's how it went, a degree at a time, for months. The bedwetting stopped in May. The fingernails took longer. The reading log came back to our Tuesday and Thursday counter, and that year's form had a caregiver line printed right on it, and my signature sits there, legal and boring, the way I like my signatures. Kristen still used the 4-hour clause sometimes. That was still her right. And the first Friday she took it, the app chimed with a message that had exclamation points in it and absolutely no legal vocabulary. "Thanks for the heads up about his cleats." That may not sound like a peace treaty to you. In our family, that was the signing of the Constitution. In June, Owen stood in the kitchen doorway with his empty cup, and he didn't say, "Hey, he said, "Rachel, can I have some water?" My own name, back in his mouth, like it had never been a landmine at all. I filled that cup very slowly so he wouldn't see my face. Nurses cry in the supply closet, that's the rule. I broke it standing at my own sink. The next spring, almost a year after the courthouse, Dr. Boone ended a family session by asking Owen if he wanted to show us his homework. He pulled a folded paper out of his backpack with the ceremony of a boy presenting state secret. A new drawing. 4 people, this time. 2 houses, 1 lopsided sun in the upper left corner, where his sons have always lived. Mom in front of one house, Dad and me in front of the other, my stick figure holding, of course, the spatula, and underneath, in careful backward-leaning letters, a caption that took him 2 lines to finish. "I have a mom, and I have a Rachel." Kristen looked at that paper for a long time. The same way she once looked at a wall in March. And then she did something no court on earth could have ordered. She laughed, wet-eyed, and said, "That's exactly right, Bud. That drawing is on our refrigerator today, not in a binder, no sticker in the corner." That summer, at his first game of the season, I stood at one end of the bleachers and Kristen stood at the other, which is not friendship and was never the assignment. 2 grown-ups, 1 field between them, holding. Owen didn't hit a home run that day. He got hit by a pitch and took his base, grinning like he'd won something, and he turned and looked for us, one looked to each end of the bleachers and waved with his whole arm. And both of us stood up at the same time, without checking with each other first. Diane wasn't there. The women at that church, I'm told, still tell the story her way. Some machines you don't get to switch off. You just stop feeding them your children. I spent my whole life believing love was a chair, one chair, and you had to earn it and then guard it, because if somebody else sat down, you were out. Kristen spent her whole life believing the same thing, with better lighting. And in the end, it took an 8-year-old with a box of crayons to teach a courtroom full of adults what neither of our mothers ever learned. Love was never a chair somebody has to lose. It's a table. And the only job the grown-ups ever had was to build it longer. That's my story. One staged word, one sealed envelope, one little boy who told the truth when nobody asked him to. If this reminded you that loving a child was never a crime, send it to somebody who's raising a blended family tonight and tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I'll be reading.